Am I audible, students, now?
Yes.
So we will be starting with the new chapter now. As I said, we'll be starting with this inheritance chapter. So we will discuss about some programs of it. So first we'll discuss a little bit of theory part of it, and then we will see the programs which we can write in inheritance. Now I'll just request each one of you to please note down whatever the programs I am giving it to you, because at least that programs you can practice it at home. Okay? Okay, students.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, now when we are talking about inheritance, as I have started with batch 2 with one program of inheritance, but for batch 1 we have not started with inheritance. So just understand first of all, what do you mean by inheritance? Now when you are talking about inheritance, inheritance is nothing but what? Extracting the features from the parent class. Okay. We have, when we have discussed the characteristics of hoops, there we have discussed inheritance is one of the characteristic. And what we have discussed in that characteristic, that inheritance is one of the feature of your object oriented language in which you can inherit the properties of the parent class. Like as we have seen, like we can write so many classes in one program. So when you are writing these classes in your program, you can you might have seen that there are certain functions which are common in both the classes, right? So we have seen that certain functions which are common to your common in your classes, we can either make them as friend function and then we can access them. But every time making that function as a friend function will not give you the solution. So then what are the other possibilities we have, or what are the other options that we can have? So one of the another feature is, like, suppose sometimes what happens, suppose class A, you have a class A in which you have certain methods or certain functions, and in class B you have another set of functions, but class B also wanted to use the functions which are declared in class A. Okay, so in that case, when you wanted to implement such kind of a program, you can do this by using the inheritance. I'll just share the slides.
Ma'am, can you repeat the last part? What you say?
Uh, just a minute, I'll just share the slides. Is the PPT visible, students?
Yes, ma'am.
See, now what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss about the inheritance in this chapter. We are going to discuss about the inheritance, polymorphism, and derived classes. These three concepts we will learn in this chapter. What do you mean by inheritance? Whenever a new class is created from your existing class, it will be called as the inheritance. Means you will be like when you will be having, we have seen a program where we have used multiple classes, but there is no link between the two classes. Only some of the functions were common in both the classes, that only we have seen, and we made that function as a friend function. But suppose now you have another class which is dependent on your the previous class, then that mechanism we can implement it using a inheritance. So inheritance is nothing but what? When you are creating a new class from the existing class, or you can say that you can create a child class from the parent class, or you can create the subclass from the superclass. So your base class or parent class is also called as the base class, or it is also called as the superclass. Okay, always remember that your parent class is can be called as the base class, or it can also be called as the superclass. Whereas the child class is known as the subclass, or it is also known as the derived class. Are you getting, students? The child class, Child class can be known as the derived class, or it can be known as what? The subclass. Okay. And then what exactly we wanted to do, once you will get to know about which is the parent class in your program and which is the child class in your program, next thing that you have to understand is about what are the various attributes and behaviors that you will have. Attributes and behavior means what? Behavior is nothing but what? Your functions. And attributes is nothing but what? The variables or the various variables that you are going to use it. Okay, so you are going to discuss about how exactly you are going to use these functions or the variables of your base class into your derived class. So as I said, often an object from your derived class, which is derived class is also known as what? A subclass, is an object of your base class also. You can also have object of your base class, which is called as the superclass. So like suppose, see this example, you may have a base class as student, and from this student you can derive a class called as a graduate student or undergraduate student. Now graduate student and undergraduate students are like the two categories of the students. Yes or no? So for them, the base class or the parent class can be a student. See, a student can be anyone. A student can be a graduate student. I can have a student who has completed his graduation, or I can have a student who is undergoing his graduation, or I may have a student who is doing his post graduation. So these are the three categories of the student. All the students may be sharing some kind of the some kind of the similar data, like all of them are belonging to the same college. Only what's the difference? Their class is different, their courses will be different, and the subjects which they have taken, that will be different. But all of them are belonging to, if all of them are belonging to the same college, then I can create a base class as student and I can have these three as subclasses. Understood this example? Yes, student? Yes, everyone.
Yes, ma'am, understood.
Now see the another example. You have a base class as shape, but this base class shape can also be categorized as, now circle can also be a shape, triangle can also be a shape, rectangle can also be a shape, right? So shape will have its own characteristic, and from that I can define the other classes as circle, triangle, or rectangle, which will have their own, like as we have discussed in function overloading. Like area will be a common function for all of them, but there are certain extra features that you have in each one of them, right? Like suppose for circle, I need to have the I need to enter the value of the radius. For triangle, I need to enter the value of the base and the height, and for rectangle I need to enter the value of the length and breadth, right? So the parameters are different, but there must be some common function you will have with respect to all these classes. So these are also a classes. Now I am not talking about their methods or anything like that. I am talking about I am talking as these, but these three will be called as what? The subclasses, and this will be your super class, or this will be your parent class. Same for your loan. Like there are various types of loans. You have car loan, home loan, mortgage loan, like that. Employee, you may have employee as faculty member, staff member, or any employee, worker, co-worker, or you may take it as a head of the department, head of the institution, like that. All these are categories of the employee, right? So I just have to define the different classes for them, because there must be some extra features I may have in each one of that class. Okay. Same thing for account. You have a saving account, you have the current account. You will not have checking account. There will be a saving account and the current account. So these two I can create it as a two subclasses system. So now how exactly you will see a hierarchy of the inheritance? How you will have a base class and the derived classes? See, like when I'm talking about, there are various types of inheritance you have. The first type of inheritance is called as your single inheritance. Now, what do you mean by single inheritance? When you have only one base class, and from that base class you have derived only one derived class. or you have extracted only one new class, then that type of inheritance is called as your single inheritance. Are you getting, students? When you have one base class and from that base class you have only one single derived class, then that will be called as your single inheritance. Just a minute, let me show you that example. See, if you'll see, I have a community member as one of the now here you go it from this point, student to community member. Now community member can be a employee, can be a student, can be a alumnus. So when I have now these are the three categories you have. But if suppose I will talk it in this way, alumnus is a community member. From alumnus, if I am talking about community member. So then if you are talking only about this part, from alumnus to community member, it becomes your single inheritance because I will have alumnus as my parent class and community member as my child class or the derived class. Similarly, if I'll consider student as my base class, community member and community member as my derived class, this also becomes my single level of inheritance or single inheritance. And same thing if I'm talking about employee and from employee I have community member as the derived class, then that will also be called as your single level inheritance. Understood? Understood single inheritance?
Yes, ma'am.
So, depending upon how many classes you are deriving from your base class, according to that, there are various types of inheritance you have. How you derive the classes, like whether you are deriving only one single class or whether you are deriving multiple classes. It may also happen that you may derive multiple classes. Like as I said, when I'm talking about a student, I may have three categories of the student. Student who is there in the school, student who is there in the college, junior college, and student who is there in the degree college. Now these are the three different categories based on which the characteristic or the features of that particular student may change, but all of them belong to one main category, that is a student. Okay, so I will create student as the base class and I may have three derived classes as school student, junior college student and degree college student. So these are the three categories I have. So according to that, then my the type of inheritance will change. So what are the different categories of inheritance you have? The first one, as I said, you have a single inheritance where you have one base class and one derived class. Okay, you will be deriving only one single class from your parent class, that will be called as your single inheritance. Second type of inheritance you have is a multiple inheritance. Now, what is this multiple inheritance? Multiple inheritance is one where you'll be having instead of having one single base class, you will be having multiple base classes. Means it is not necessary to have only one base class. You may have two base classes, but then from that two base classes, you might have inherited or you might have derived only one single class. Okay, you might have derived only one single class. So when you have that kind of uh, inheritance, it will be called as your multiple inheritance. Are you getting what is a multiple inheritance? When you have when you have two base classes and only one single derived class from the two base classes, it is called as your multiple inheritance. Okay, so in the same diagram you can see that. See here in this diagram now, if I am talking about this faculty and the staff, faculty and the staff are the two base classes that I have. Okay, or here you can see administrator teacher. Administrator, teacher, just a minute. I think they have given this diagram is a little bit wrong. You just consider this faculty and staff as two base classes, and from this I have derived only. So this diagram is completely wrong. Let me show you some other diagram. Then it
Ma'am,
will
that
be clear.
administrator teacher wala is single
It
inheritance.
no, it is not single inheritance. The diagram is not correct. Administrator teacher, if you'll consider, na, actually administrator teacher becomes that will be derived from this administrator and teacher. So it should then it will become multiple inheritance. They have given it as multiple inheritance. But agar if we'll see from administrator teacher, it will not be single inheritance also. It will not be multiple inheritance also. I will show you the other diagram. Then it will be clear. Otherwise, you will have confusion.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Is this slide share ka slide visible to you, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So just see. I'll just tell you about all this afterwards. We will just see the types of inheritance first. So these are the five types of inheritance we are going to discuss. The first one is single inheritance. Then you have multiple inheritance. Then third is multi-level inheritance. Then fourth one is your hierarchical inheritance, and fifth one is hybrid inheritance. So what is a single inheritance? Single inheritance is the one where you have one single base class and a single derived class. But the derived class is how it is derived? It is derived from that base class. That's why the arrow is being shown from B to A, because B is derived from A. So A is called as your base class, or A is also called as the superclass. And B, the class B is called as your subclass, or it is also called as your derived class. Hope this is clear to everyone. Single inheritance. Yes, students?
Yes, ma'am, clear.
Okay. Now, this examples and all, we'll see it later. Now, just see multi-level inheritance. Now, what is a multi-level inheritance? So, multi-level inheritance is a one where a subclass inherits from a class that itself is inherited from the another class. Means you will have a class which is derived from the base class, and you will have one more class which is derived from the previous derived class. Like if you'll see in the diagram, it will be clear to you. You have a class A. From class A, I have derived class B. And then from class B, I have derived class C. Are you getting? So class A is actually my parent class. From this parent class, I have derived another class. And from this derived class, I am deriving one more class. So it is like you have a grandparent, then you have the parent, and then you have the child class. So multi-level inheritance, you can remember it as it is an example of grandparent, parent and child relationship. Okay, so class A, which is a base class, or which is also called as your super class. Then class B, which is a subclass or a derived class, which is derived from a base class A. And then you have one more derived class that is C. Okay, so class B is actually a base class for what? C. Class B is a base class for C as well, and C is the derived class of B. Understood? So actually what
Ma'am,
happens now? Yes.
ma'am, so we can say that class C is derived class, so class B will be a base class for class C.
What?
We can say like that, ki class B is the base class for class C then.
Yes, I said na class B is the base class for class C. So actually what happens now? B is derived from class A. So B is accessing the features of class A, right? And C is accessing the features of class B. But B may already we are accessing the features of A. So indirectly C is able to access the features of B, directly it is able to access the features of B, but indirectly it is able to access the features of A. Yes or no? Yes or no, students? C.
Yes,
B is able to directly access the features of A. Yes or no? Because B is derived from A,
yes,
right? And C is directly accessing the features of B because C is derived from B. Yes or no?
yes, ma'am.
So that means what? C can indirectly access the features of A because A का features तो B में रहेगा. So definitely B, since B is accessible to C, so C can indirectly access the features of A. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is what called as your multi-level inheritance. When you have one class, which is you have one base class from which you have one derived class, and from that derived class, you are deriving one more class. That type of that level of inheritance is called as your multi-level inheritance. Clear? Clear, everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Now we have third type of inheritance called as multiple inheritance. So multiple inheritance, what do you mean by multiple inheritance? Where you will not have one single base class, you will have multiple base classes. Okay, so in multiple inheritance, a derived class inherits from multiple base classes. So it is not having one parent class, it is having two parent classes. So then it is called as your multiple inheritance. Like you have mother and you have father, and from that you have a child. So that is what called as your multiple inheritance. So a class A and class B both will be your base classes, and from that both the base classes you have class C, which is a derived class. So that means what? Class C can access the features of A as well as class C can access the features of B. Yes or no? Yes
Yes,
or
ma'am.
no, students? As a child, you may have some qualities of your mother or you may have some qualities of your father. Right? So class A will be nothing but what? Your derived class. Whereas class A and class B will be your two separate base classes. These are the two separate base classes that you have. When you have this type of inheritance, it is called as your multiple inheritance. Clear? Clear
Yes.
everyone with multiple inheritance?
Yes.
Okay. Now next we have, next type of inheritance is called as your hierarchical inheritance. Now what is this? All this type of inheritance are very much important. So all of you please remember each type of, at least you may get a theory questions like what are the different types of inheritance and all. So what is a hierarchical inheritance? In hierarchical inheritance, it's like a inverted tree. You can consider it as an inverted tree. Why? Because see, it is so you can say that there are multiple classes which are inherited from a single base class. What you have? You have multiple classes that are inherited from single base class. Like the example of student which we have seen. We have a class student as a base class, and from that we have a undergraduate student, postgraduate student, PhD student. If we have these categories, then it will become your hierarchical inheritance where you have one single base class and you have multiple derived classes. Then that type of inheritance is called as your hierarchical inheritance. So it is like a tree kind of a structure. Yes or no? Yes or no, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So hierarchical is always you will be having one base class and you will be having multiple derived classes. Now next we have the last type of inheritance we have is what called as your hybrid inheritance. Now what do you mean by hybrid inheritance? When you are combining two or more types of inheritance. If you'll see the diagram, we have multiple inheritance also and we have multi-level inheritance also in this. So it is a mixture of more than one inheritance. So when we have the mixture of more than one inheritance, it will be what called as your hybrid inheritance. So in this type of inheritance, what we can do, see, when you're talking about class A, from class A, you have derived class B and class C. So these two are subclasses, class B and class C, right? So this is what type of inheritance? It will be hierarchical. From, if you will not consider this class D, you are considering only class A, and from class A, you have class B and class C. So what type of inheritance it will be? Hierarchical? Yes or no? It will be
Yes,
hierarchical.
ma'am.
But if suppose now, so I have hierarchical inheritance in this. Then if suppose I'm talking about class B and class C as two separate subclasses and sorry, two separate base classes, and from that I have one derived class. What type of inheritance it is?
Multiple inheritance.
Yes, it is.
Multiple inheritance.
Yes, it will be multiple inheritance. And we have also seen that from class A we are deriving class B, and from class B we are deriving class D. So what type of inheritance it will be?
Multi-level.
Yes. So when you have the mixture of all these three types of inheritance, it will be called as what? Your hybrid inheritance. So what are the different types of inheritance we have discussed? We have discussed about single inheritance. We have discussed about multiple inheritance. We have discussed about multi-level inheritance. We have discussed about hierarchical inheritance. And last, we have discussed about hybrid inheritance. Okay. Hope all these types are clear to you. Yes,
Ma'am, can you
students?
revise once again, ma'am?
See. What? see, what are the different types of inheritance we have discussed? First of all, we have the first type of inheritance is a very simple inheritance that is called as your single inheritance. Single inheritance में क्या होता है? You will have only one base class and you'll be having only one derived class which is derived from that base class or which is extracted from that base class. Okay. So single inheritance is the one where you have one single base class and one single derived class. Okay. So class A is called as your base class and class B is called as your derived class. So just whenever you will have only one single base class and one single derived class, it will be called as your single inheritance. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Second type of inheritance we have discussed about multi-level inheritance. Multi-level means what? You will have levels of inheritance. From class A, you will be having class B. From class B, you are deriving another class. So that will be class C. So that is what called as your multi-level inheritance. Means now, what are the other things that I have told you about this? See, class A is your base class. Okay. So that will be your base class, or you can say it is a super class. From this class A, you're deriving another class that is class B. Okay. So class B can access the features of A. Features of A matlab kya? It can access the functions or the variables of A.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, from this class B, you are accessing the features, you are deriving one more class that is class C. Class B say you are deriving one more class that is class C, which can access the features of class B. Yes or
Yes,
no?
ma'am.
Okay. But class B is already accessing the features of A. So that means class C is indirectly accessing the features of class A. Correct? Yes or no, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this type of inheritance is called as your multi-level inheritance. Now, third type we have discussed is about multiple inheritance. Now, what is multiple inheritance? Just remember that when you have more than one base classes, when you have more than one base class and from that one base classes, you have only one single derived class. यहाँ पे you will have derived class as one single derived class only. Okay. Then that will be called as your multiple inheritance. Okay. You have two base classes, but from that two base classes, if you are deriving only one single derived class or you are having only one single class, it will be called as your multiple inheritance.
Ma'am, why the arrows are given from down to up? Like they
It is
should be
like
from
it
up
is,
to.
see, that is saying how this class C is derived. So class C is derived from class A also and it is derived from class B also. It is showing how it is being derived. That's why the arrows are being shown like that. See, for if you'll see for this also, single level inheritance also, it's saying that class B is derived from A. So how the class B is being created? It is created from A. So the arrow is being shown from down to upwards. But for your understanding, you can down it and you can draw it from the up to downwards.
Okay.
Clear? Okay. Next is we have hierarchical inheritance where we have one single base class, but we'll be having multiple derived classes. See, multiple inheritance and hierarchical inheritance उल्टा है एक दूसरे से. Multiple inheritance में क्या है? You just have only one single derived class. Whereas in hierarchical inheritance में क्या है? You have only one single base class. Yes or no? So that is what called as your hierarchical inheritance. Okay. And the last type we have discussed is about the hybrid inheritance. What is hybrid inheritance? Which is a mixture of more than one or two types of inheritance. Like you will be having multiple inheritance also, you will be having multi-level inheritance also, or you will be having hierarchical inheritance also. When you have combined all this type of inheritance, it will be called as your hybrid inheritance. Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, everyone clear with this?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a minute, students. So now we'll be seeing one by one, we'll be seeing how exactly we can write a program for each one of this type of inheritance. Now, before that, before learning how to write a program for that, for these type of inheritance, we need to understand the syntax of the inheritance, and we also need to understand what are the different accessibility modes that you will use. So, see, when you're talking about what is an inheritance, it is a kind of a relationship that you will find out. When you're talking about single inheritance, it is a kind of a relationship. Like cat is a mammal, dog is a mammal. So there is a relationship you will always have whenever you're talking about is a or has a kind of a relationship you will always have in inheritance. So you need to check that is a relationship. So the idea behind this inheritance is we are implementing this relationship. Like mammal is a animal or dog is a mammal. So hence we can also say that dog is a animal, like that we can inherit or we can predict the relationships like that. Then there is one more feature, you have it over here, like the derived classes have all the features of the base classes, and the programmer can choose to add the new feature specific to the newly created derived class also. Means derived class can have its own features also. Along with that, it can access all the features of the base class also. Okay, so inheritance is the process by which a new class, which is a new class called the derived class, are created from existing classes, or that can be created from your base classes. Then, what are the advantages of inheritance you have, or what are the features of this inheritance you have? The most important advantage of inheritance is what you have the reusability of the code. It also saves the time and efforts. You have faster development, and it is easy to maintain and easy to extend, and it is capable of expressing the inheritance relationship and its transitive nature, which ensures closeness with real world problems. Now just discuss about this we will just discuss about what do you mean by this reusability of the code. As I said, what happens, like when you have written a base class, suppose you have created one base class as student, तो स्टूडेंट का बेसिक फीचर्स क्या रहेगा? व्हाट आर द बेसिक प्रॉपर्टीज ऑफ अ स्टूडेंट? You will have a name of the student, you will have a roll number of the student, then you may also wanted to know the date of birth of the student, like that. Now then if I have if from this student class, if I have derived another class, another student class as undergraduate student. Now as an undergraduate student, that undergraduate student may also have a name and roll number. All these features he will also have. Yes or no? If a particular
Yes.
person if he is a student, definitely he will also have a name and roll number. So I don't have to define again this variables in that undergraduate student. What I can do, I can directly access them from the base class as student, because base class में मैंने already वो लिखा है. I've already defined that variables, or already I have defined one particular method to get the name and roll number of the student. Like suppose I have written a get data method in my student class itself. So I don't have to write this get data method again in my base class. Sorry, in my derived class. I can access the method which I have written in base class itself. So that's the way you are performing the reusability of the code. There is no need to write the same function again in your derived class. So definitely it will save the time also, and it will be more effort. It will give you more. It will be more efficient. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes or no, student? Now, if we'll talk about the syntax of this derived class, to create a derived class from already existing base class, you can derive it or you can write it. This is the syntax that you have. You have to write a class derived class, that is class is the keyword followed by your derived class name, then the colon, then you have to give the access specifier, and then the base class name. So above this, you will already have one base class. And then from that base class, when you wanted to derive the derived class, you will be writing a keyword class followed by the derived class name, then the colon, then the access specifier. What is this access specifier? We'll see in detail. There are three types of access specifiers you can use when you're talking about inheritance, that is public, private, and protected. So when you'll use public, when you'll use private, when you'll use protected, that all we will see. And then followed by that, you will be giving what? You will be giving base class name. Why? Because see, अगर हम लोग कोई class derive कर रहे हैं from one of the base class or from the parent class, so when the compiler should also get to know from which class this class is being derived. Suppose I have class B, class A and class B, and class B is derived from class A. So compiler should know class B is derived from which class. So what is the parent class of this class B? So that's why you need to define the base class name. So you will be using only one single colon followed by that base class name. Understood? And always it will have a semicolon at the end. It is not given over here, but you will have a semicolon at the end. Okay, so just see here what is written. This is my base class, class animals, where I have opened the class brackets are open and the semicolon is given. So this is my base class. The base class is closed. See, base class, I am not writing anything here. This is just a structure of your base class. I may have written certain variables over here, certain functions over here, right? Now from this class, if I wanted to derive any other class, so what I will write? I will write the derived class name. So how will I write class? Then amphibians will be my derived class. So class amphibians is my derived class, but from which class it is derived? From the animals. So I will write colon public animal. So public is what your access specifier. And from which class you wanted to derive it? From the base class animal. So that's why I will write the base class name as animals. Why you have to write like this? Because there may be so many classes you may have in your program. So to get to know from which class you are actually deriving it, so that's why we are giving this base class name. Clear with this? Even your derived class will have a semicolon at the end. Always your class will terminate with the semicolon in C++.
Ma'am, by writing this public wala thing, access
That I will
specifier
tell you.
before.
That I will tell you because see, abhi what we have discussed in inheritance. Inheritance is used to access the methods or the functions of your base class, right? So abhi base class mein I must be having some public private methods likha rahega idhar. Yes or no? Like I'll show you one example. Is the screen visible to you? Yes, students.
Yes, sir.
Here I am writing class A. Okay. Now in this class A, I may be declaring some variable int A, public void get is the method I have, suppose, which is used cout, enter the value for A. I'm just asking user to enter this value. Okay. And suppose I have void display method also, in which I am writing is equal to okay. So this is my base class A. Now what I wanted to do, I wanted to derive another class from this and I wanted to implement single inheritance. Single inheritance है मतलब मुझे I can derive only one class from it. तो ये derive class का नाम मुझे देना है suppose. Derive class का name I am giving it as B. Okay. Then after that I will give a colon. Then I have to write the accessibility mode. Okay. So suppose for example I have written public over here and from which class I am deriving it? From A. And यहाँ पे now this class write it in. Alright. Now what this class B will have? Class B will have its own variable. Yes. Then again here also it will have a public method to get the value of this B. So suppose again here I have void get method. And I'm asking user to enter the value for B, suppose cout enter Now I am writing in shortcut, enter value for B, and I am taking that value. Again, this is also having void display method, suppose. And I am displaying the value of I am closing this class. Now what I need to do, see, I need to now this is an example of single inheritance. Okay. Now what I need to do, I need to create the object of my, see, if I wanted to access both of these classes, I need to create the object of these classes. Yes or no? Now which object, creation of which object will be suitable for me? I can create the object of the base class also. I can create the object of the derived class also. But what I said, in the derived class, you can access the features of your base class also. Okay. So which object should I create? Base class object or derived class object?
Derived class.
Derived class object. Okay. So what is my derived class? My derived class is B.
B.
Class.
So suppose B ka I am creating object as derived. B ka object I am creating it as, I am creating as BB. Okay. So with this BB, now I am calling get method. Just see now what happens. And with this BB, I am calling display method. Now I will run the program. So this I have not closed. Okay? See, now what is happening when I am calling this get method of this derived class? What is happening? It is giving me any garbage value. Why? Because, sorry.
Ma'am, first you'll have to stop from the above.
Yes, yes. See, I'm entering some value and I'm able to display that value. Is my base class getting called anywhere?
Ma'am.
No, it's not getting
No.
called. Now because the thing is we have just created the object of the derived class and we are calling that we are calling the methods of the derived class. Okay. And if you'll see, the methods are also, the names of the methods are also same. मतलब base class का method also, in base class also I have get and display method. In derived class also I have get and display method. Okay. So what your inheritance is, if I, since I am creating a single level of inheritance, this class B can access this. Whatever you have in class A, it can access all that. But will you be able to access the private variables outside the class? Will you be able to access private variables outside the class? Outside the class, मतलब दूसरे कोई class में भी, will you be able to access? No. We have discussed that private variables are not at all accessible outside the class. Yes or no? But whatever you have written in public, that is accessible outside the class.
Yes.
Okay, so that means this get method which you have written and display method which you have written should be accessible outside the class.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, अभी it is accessible. So that means ये जो derived class है, ये derived class को ये get method and display method accessible है. And that will remain public. Public मतलब क्या? अगर हमने यहाँ पे public दिया है accessibility mode, अगर हमने यहाँ पे पब्लिक दिया है एक्सेसिबिलिटी मोड, दैट मीन्स वॉट एवर वी आर एक्सेसिंग फ्रॉम क्लास ए, दैट विल रिमेन पब्लिक फॉर क्लास बी ऑल्सो. So get method and display method will be accessible to it. So how I will be accessing it over here? To access it over here, I have to call it like this: A, the class name followed by get, semicolon. Same way, to call the display method, I have to call A understood. And now if I'll run, so it is asking me now, since I have written A and B all together, so it is asking me to enter the value for A and B. So it will accept two values, 12. Oh, sorry. Here scene I have not written. Now if I'll run this, see, it is asking me enter the value for A, so I'm entering 12. It is asking me to enter the value for B, so I am entering 52, and it is able to display the value of A as well as B. Understood this part? Yes, students.
Yes, ma'am.
अभी देखो what changes I am doing. Suppose I am not writing the display method in class B. क्लास बी में मैं डिस्प्ले मेथड नहीं लिख रही हूँ. Okay, so what are the changes I have done? In class A I have a get method, I have a display method. In class B I have a get method where I am calling a get method of my class A also, and display method I don't have in class B. Okay, and here I am calling bb.get method also and bb.display also. So which display method will get called? I don't have a display method in derived class. So will my base class display method get called? Will it get called?
Yes.
Yes, it will get called. So if I'll run this, it is asking me to enter the value for A, enter the value for 50 B as 56. And you can see that only A ka value is getting printed. So that means my base class display method is getting called. Understood? So all of you please copy this program and then we'll continue for the next one. So this is the example. Give the heading for this example as single level inheritance. Take a 5 minutes break and then we will join at 11:35. all of you, have you copied this program? Yes, students. Yes, all of you, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So now, so this is the concept about single inheritance. Now, one more thing that I wanted to tell you is about, see, now you asked me that why this public is there. So public is nothing but what? Accessibility mode. What this accessibility mode says, if you write this as public, then whatever you have in derived class, that will remain public for your whatever you have public in your base class, that will remain public for your derived class also. समझा? मतलब the methods which you have in your base class as the public methods, that methods will remain public for your derived class as well. Okay, अभी I will just check the I will just change the visibility mode. अभी उसके पहले I will remove this. And now see, now here I will write it as private. अभी मैंने accessibility mode private कर दिया. Private means what? How you are deriving your class. जब तुम लोग class derive करते हो तभी कैसे derive करना है? Because since there are various types of inheritance you have, how many classes you wanted to derive? वो define होगा based on this accessibility mode. अगर मैंने यहाँ पे ये accessibility mode private किया, तो that means all the public methods of your base class will become private in your derived class. Are you getting, students? All the public methods of your base class will become private in your derived class. तो that means अभी ये private class, sorry, ये derived class के अंदर वो methods private हो गए. So if it becomes private in your derived class, will you be able to access outside the derived class? Be able to access them outside the derived class. So now I'll just run this program and we'll see what happens. So since though we have written it private, it is asking us to enter the value for A. So suppose I'm entering it as 20. It is asking me to enter the value of B also. And it is able to print both the values. Why? Because though I have created it as private, क्या हुआ मेरा get and display method separates है. I have two separate methods in my derived class. Get and display separate methods है. And I am in that separate methods I am calling the base class ka methods also. So that's why it is not giving me any problem. You can directly display the values of, or you can call the methods of your base class also, and you are able to call the methods of your derived class also. अभी now I am doing the change. Again I am doing that change. Suppose ये display मैंने नहीं लिखा. Again I have not written. Derived class का display नहीं लिखा. So that means this bb dot display should give the call to what? This to a dot display. Yes, students. bb dot display should give a call to a dot display. Yes or no, students? Yes or no, students?
Can I repeat the question?
See, अभी मेरे प्रोग्राम में क्या है? क्लास ए में मेरा गेट मेथड है, डिस्प्ले मेथड है, ओके? Then class B I have derived from A, in which again I have a get method, and I have called the get method of my base class also, which is accessible. Okay? फिर I'm asking user to enter the value for B, और इसका display method नहीं है मेरे पास अभी. I don't have a display method in my derived class. Since I don't have a display method in derived class, when I'm calling bb.get, bb.get method will call your derived class का get method. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes.
And उसके अंदर a का get method भी call हो जाएगा. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. But bb.display, now which display method it will call? I don't have display method in derived class.
Base class.
Base class display method? Okay, so just see it now carefully. See, what error you are getting? All of you please read this error. What is this error? See, this bb.display, it's giving us an error. What it is saying? A is not accessible base of B. Are you getting? इसके पहले जब हमने डिस्प्ले लिखा था, we were able to display both the values of A and B. Why? Because we had a display method in our derived class. Yes or no?
Yes.
अभी क्यों नहीं दे रहा है वो डिस्प्ले को एक्सेस? बिकॉज दिस bb डॉट डिस्प्ले इज ट्राइंग टू एक्सेस योर बेस क्लास का डिस्प्ले, बट बेस क्लास का डिस्प्ले बिकम्स प्राइवेट इन क्लास बी. तो क्लास बी के बाहर तुम लोग यूज नहीं कर सकते. यू कैन एक्सेस इट ओनली इन क्लास बी, यू कैन नॉट एक्सेस इट इन क्लास ए. अगर मैंने यहाँ पे सिर्फ ये लिखा ना, सपोज गेट ए के बाद इफ आई एम कॉलिंग a colon display, it will work. But this bb dot display will not work. See, again it is giving us the error for that bb dot display. So I will just comment this one. If I'll run, it will work. Can you see A ka value we are able to print? Yes, students?
Yes, ma'am.
समझा? क्यों? Because we are able to call the display method of base class in the derived class, but we cannot call it outside the derived class. We cannot call it in the main method also. Understood? So that is the use of this accessibility mode. कितना तुम्हें inheritance कहाँ तक, कौन से level तक करना है? See, we may also have a type of inheritance where we have the inheritance from our grandparent to parent and then to a child, right? So this is a kind of inheritance which is applicable to anyone, right? But if suppose and from a child I may have some further inheritance also, but somewhere I have to stop the inheritance, or somewhere I have to limit the amount of inheritance that I will have, or the levels of inheritance that I have. So whenever you wanted to limit that, or whenever you wanted to have access to only some functions of your base class, that time you can make use of this accessibility mode as private. That time you make this accessibility mode, or you can declare it as private. Understood? Yes, students.
Yes, ma'am.
So just see this PPT. So it will be much more clear to you. Is it visible to you, PPT? Is the
Yes,
PPT?
ma'am.
See, access control inheritance. See, now here the diagram is given. All of you please draw this diagram so that it becomes easier for you to understand. That's why I'm showing you this PPT, so that with the diagram it becomes easier for you to understand. See, a derived class can access all the protected and public members of its base class. Whenever you have written, there are three types of visibility modes you have, or the access specifiers you have: public, private and protected. अभी तक हमने जो भी classes use किया उसमें public and private ही use किया. But protected is normally used in inheritance. Whenever you have a programs of inheritance, there only this protected is being used. So you have a base class. In a base class, you may have a variables or a functions which are under private declaration. You may have functions and variables which are under protected declaration, and you may have functions or variables which are under public declaration, right? So what they are saying, private cannot be inherited at all. You cannot access any of the private functions in your child class or in your derived class. Whatever the type of inheritance you have, in any of the types, whatever the different types we have learned, in any of these types, we cannot have or we cannot inherit any of the private variables or the private functions. Okay? Okay, students?
Yes, ma'am.
But if you're talking about protected, protected can be inherited in your derived class, but there is some mechanism that you have for accessing this protected that we will discuss further. Okay, when you're talking about protected inheritance, protected functions or protected variables in your class, protected ke liye, protected you can access it in derived class, but there is a level of inheritance which you have to consider when you're talking about protected variables or functions. Public can be inherited in any number of child classes. Whereas when you're talking about public accessibility, whatever you have publicly defined in your base class, everything you can inherit in any number of derived classes you have in your program. Have you drawn this diagram?
Ma'am, can you tell the difference between public and protected?
Protected we will see in the next slide. I will explain you protected. See, there is a difference you have. See, protected is first of all, let me tell you, public matlab kya? Public is visible to any number of classes. Public means it is publicly known to everyone. Remember in that way. Okay. Like suppose if I have a particular method defined publicly in my base class, then I can use that publicly defined method in any number of derived classes. Or I can use it outside any of the classes also. Clear with public?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now what is protected? Protected means what? Whatever you have defined as protected, whatever the function or variable that you have defined it as protected, there is a level of inheritance that can be defined with that protected variables. Means it can be inherited in your child class, and from that child class to only one more child class it can be inherited, not more than that. Are you getting? Whereas public can be inherited in any number of derived classes, but protected as the name suggests, it is protected. So with one particular level, it will be protected. So from your base class, you can derive it in the child class, but from that child class, if you have another child class, only to that child class it will be accessible, but further inheritance will not be allowed. After that, if you have any further inheritance, it will not be allowed. Yes. First tell me, have you drawn this diagram, everyone? Yes, students? Yes, everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
See now here. So you can summarize these different access types according to who can access them in the following way. See. If we are talking about only one single class, जो हम लोगों ने अभी तक use किया है, in most of the programs we have used the public methods or the public functions. So in the same class, you may have access to the public methods, you may have access to protected methods, you may have access to the private methods also. But if you are talking about the derived classes, in the derived class, you can access the public methods of your base class. You can access the protected methods of your base class also. But you cannot access the private methods of your base class. Remember this table in this way. See, in your derived class, you can access the public methods of your base class. You can access the protected methods of your base class. But you cannot access the private methods of your base class. Okay? If suppose you have some more classes outside the class, you can access the public methods, but you cannot access the protected methods. And you cannot access the private methods also. And you also have to remember that constructors and destructors of your base classes cannot be inherited. If you are using any constructors, that constructors cannot be inherited. Clear? Clear, everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
So when we are talking about visibility modes and inheritance, a child class can inherit the base class in these three ways, that is private, protected and public. See what happens now if you have a private members of your base class. So private members of your base class that cannot be inherited, that we have discussed. We cannot inherit them in the derived class. Okay. But if suppose you have protected members, so protected will become private of your child class. When you are accessing the protected members or protected functions of your base class, in the child class, it will become private. So that's why after that, you will not be able to access them. Okay. And if suppose you are writing that accessibility mode, अभी हम लोग वो जो private लिखते हैं ना, ये वो बोल रहा है, if you are writing it private. If you are writing it private, the public क्या होगा? Becomes private of your child class. The public variables or the methods will also becomes private of your child class. Why? Because this means that, see, see this example. See here, I may write it as, if I am writing it public, मतलब कैसा मैं inheritance कर रही हूँ? How I am inheriting the class? I am inheriting it publicly. तो इसका जो भी public methods है, that will remain public for my derived class also. Understood? Are you getting, students? If I am writing private over here, अगर मैंने यहाँ पे private लिखा, तो what do you mean by that? The public method of your base class will become private inside this class. So that's why, as I showed you, the display method we were not able to call it in the main because वो derived class में private हो गया. Though it is public in your base class, but since यहाँ पे inheritance का level तुमने क्या दिया है private, तो base class का जो भी public methods है, that will become private over here. Hope all of you have understood.
Yes.
And the third one is what we have discussed about is protected one. Protected क्या होगा? Protected will also become private in your. यहाँ पे अगर मैंने private ही लिखा और यहाँ पे see I have a public variables. Similarly अगर मैंने यहाँ पे protected में भी कुछ डाला है, protected, suppose I have written void set method, suppose मैंने यहाँ पे लिखा है see see now what do you mean by this protected? This void set method, see this void set method which is protected over here, and since you have written private over here, तो ये protected के अंदर भी जो method लिखा है वो यहाँ पे भी क्या हो जाएगा? Private हो जाएगा. Understood? Public methods of your base class will also become private over here because यहाँ पे private लिखा है, and protected methods of your base class will also become private in your derived class. Is this clear? Yes, students? Is this clear, students? See what it is saying. यहाँ पे मैंने see यहाँ पे अभी int है मेरा कैसा int है क्या है मेरा private है by default. Yes, students. So what we have discussed about private variables or private methods are not accessible outside the class. It is accessible only within that class. तो ये class A में ही accessible होगा. Okay? अभी हम लोग यहाँ पे private लिखेंगे. That means class B is derived from A privately. How you can read? Class B is derived from class A privately. तो अगर वो privately derive किया है, तो what do you mean by that? Private methods will not be accessible. Okay. Public methods will become private for your derived class. It will be accessible, but it will become private in your derived class. Okay. And protected methods will also become private in your derived class. It will be accessible, but it will become private in your derived class. That means इसके आगे और कोई डेरिवेशन रहेगा और इसके आगे और कोई तुमने एक क्लास डिराइव किया तो उसमें प्रोटेक्टेड वेरिएबल्स एक्सेसिबल नहीं होगा और प्रोटेक्टेड फंक्शंस एक्सेसिबल नहीं होगा. Clear with this statement? Yes, everyone. Only Hemakshi is there.
No, ma'am.
Not clear, Kef?
Yes, ma'am, understood.
Now we will see what will happen if we'll write public over here. We can write public also access. हम लोग derive करने के लिए publicly भी access कर सकते हैं, right? So if we'll write the inheritance by public, तो क्या होगा? With respect to your base class, we are talking with respect to base class, right? Private variables again will not be accessible, though it is publicly inherited. Okay? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Then next is what? Public. Public variables and functions will remain public for your derived class also. Public variables and functions will remain public in your derived class also. Okay? So public कौन सा है ये void get, void display ये public methods है तुम्हारे base class का. So it will remain public for your derived class also. मतलब क्या है? तुम लोग you can use that public methods of base class in some other class also, or you can use it outside the class also in your main function also. Okay. अभी next क्या है? Protected है. Okay. Next क्या है हमारा? Protected है. तो what do you mean by this protected? Protected becomes protected members of your child class. मतलब अभी if suppose you have it protected, तो protected है तो क्या होगा? It will remain protected for your child class also. तो अगर यहाँ पे जो protected method है, it will remain protected for this also, for this class B. मतलब तभी मैं क्या कर सकती हूँ? I can use that protected method in one more level of inheritance. Protected method or functions of your base class will remain protected in your derived class because we are deriving it publicly. Okay, so it will remain protected in your derived class as well. So that means what? I can use it in another one more derived class also, or any other class or outside any other class. Got it? Got it, student? Yes or no, students? Yes, sweetie,
Yes, ma'am.
Hemakshi, and all the others. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Now see third level of inheritance. That is now अभी कौन सा हम लोग inheritance use कर सकते हैं? Instead of inheriting it publicly, we can inherit it protectedly also. I can write class B protected class A. So that means class B is derived from A protectedly. अभी अगर हम लोगों ने ये protectedly inherit किया तो क्या होगा? Private variables of your base class will not be accessible. Protected becomes protected will become protected members of your child class. तभी जो भी protected variables है यहाँ पे तुम्हारा, जो protected functions है यहाँ पे, that will remain protected here also, like your public. It will become protected variables. Okay. एंड पब्लिक जो वेरिएबल्स है, अभी पब्लिक जो वेरिएबल्स और फंक्शंस है, दिस पब्लिक फंक्शंस गेट एंड डिस्प्ले, that will also become protected in your class B because यहाँ पे we are inheriting it protectedly. Are you getting? So public variables or functions will also become protected in your derived class. Understood? Yes, students.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is what is being given in that particular chart, and this is given in your book also. Today I will put that book. I'm forgetting to put the e-book. See here. If the inheritance type is private, inheritance type is private मतलब क्या, तुम लोग class B derive करते वक्त अगर private लिख रहे हो तो private variables of your base class will cannot be inherited. Protected variables or the functions of your base class becomes private of child class, and public becomes the private of your child class. So this is what I have explained you now. So all of you take a pic of this table and you have to understand this table so that when we are writing a program, it will be clear to you how exactly we are implementing the inheritance. Have you taken the picture of this, student?
Done, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
See, now these are the sample codes they have shown. See, now I have, is this visible to you? I have a class B in which I have a private variable as int a, and I have a void function a as the private function. Protected may I have int b and void function b as the protected function, and public may I have int c and void function c as the function. Okay. Now what is done? If I am deriving a class, if I am, see here, class child is being written, which is derived privately from the base class. If I am deriving it privately, so what will happen? Private variable a इसमें access ही नहीं होगा. Okay. Private variable a access ही नहीं होगा. जो protected है, that will become private in your derived class. The protected variables, whatever you have, that will become private in your derived class. Yes or no? And जो public है, that will also become private in your derived class. Public will also become private and protected will also become private in your derived class. Okay. So protected members inherited from your base class will that will be your function B and function C, that will also become protected. See, when you have protected inheritance, that is here you are using protected base. What is happening? अभी हम लोग protected base protectedly we are inheriting a derived class. तो तभी क्या होगा? Protected will remain protected in your derived class. जो protected members of your base class है, that will become protected for your derived class also. And जो public members है, that will also become protected in your derived class. So अगर यहाँ पे protected है, तो what you have to remember? Private तो हमें anyways access करने को नहीं होगा. But protected and public members of your base class, both will become protected in your derived class if we are deriving it protectedly. Understood? And third is public inheritance. Public inheritance में क्या होगा? If we are writing public over here, we are deriving a child class publicly from the base class, then क्या होगा? The protected members will also become protected will remain protected only, but public protected will also become public variables, and protected will become public, as well as public will also remain public in your derived class. I hope this is clear to everyone now. Yes, students.
Yes, ma'am. Clear.
So you can just see example of this single inheritance where I have a class student. Here you have a class student. Private में क्या लिखा है? Character name 20, float marks. Protected में void result करके एक method लिखा है. And public में student करके एक method है and void enroll करके एक method है and void display करके एक method है. Now from this class student I am deriving a class course which is derived publicly from class student. तो इसका structure ऐसा है. Student base class is my class student or the parent class is my student and the base class is course. Base class is course. And how I am deriving it? I am deriving it publicly. Okay. तो क्या होगा अभी? Private will not be accessible. Okay. What will be accessible? Your protected. Protected will remain. Protected will become public and public will also become public. So I can access protected and the public methods. Okay. So here I have declared one more variable over here, that is long course code and character course name. And in public, I have a course as a method and void commerce as another method and void C details. So what it says, when you are having this type of inheritance, I can access the public and the protected variables of or the functions of my class student. And I have only one base class and one derived class. So that's why it is called as your single level inheritance. Clear? Yes, students?
Yes, ma'am.
So today we'll stop over here. In the next lecture, we will discuss the example of multiple and multi-level inheritance. And next lecture you have today at 2:30.
Okay, ma'am.
All of you can leave now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye.
Sorry, you will have OOPS lecture at 2. Sorry, not at 2:30. Yeah? You will have OOPS lecture today at 2. 2
Okay,
to
ma'am.
3:30 we will have OOPS lecture. Okay. Thank you, everyone. You can leave now.